there's no attendees yet, but then for you, I want to, let's see, make host, I'm gonna guess. Yes.
I am the host.
There you go, and I can record.
I'm gonna share my screen.
And I've hit the record, so.
Okay. Let's change.
Yep, I'm seeing.
We're looking good. Oh, it'd probably help if I go to the beginning. There we go. Let's start in the middle.
Yeah.
Change it up. Change it up. So is it going to Facebook?
I don't think so. I don't think Allison needed me to do that
That's okay.
one. So
no worries. If it was, I was just gonna share it. But we'll be happy with the group.
I'll see if I can get her on the chat here.
It's no big deal either way, because.
Well, I know if I'm supposed to and I don't, she'll be cranky. Well, okay, you're telling me that. Allison did not tell me that, and I don't know how to do that. Okay. So I'm asking her, and she's seen my question. Only if you know how. Okay. Let's see, 3 dots. Oh, you know what? Since I'm not host, I'm not sure I can now.
Oh. There's a live on Facebook option. Should I click that?
Go for it.
Here we go.
Although I don't know if it might, no, I think it then goes to your page, not our page. I think.
Oh yeah, I got an error.
Yeah, okay.
Can we make you the host again?
Yeah, make me the host again. And we got some attendees.
Hi, attendees.
Yeah, hi, attendees. We're working out some last minute details. Give us just a moment before we get started.
Making you the host. Here we go. There you are.
Now the host. Okay. Then you find it under 3 dots. Where did you find where was the button for, more. Here we go. There we go. Live on Facebook. Continue as me, but then I want to share it to a public. Okay. Okay. Aha, share to your page. Select page, do space, go live. Preparing. Ooh, I think we're working here. Okay. And we're sharing your screen. So I think I'm going to stay host because I'm afraid I will break this if I don't. Yeah. But it looks like we are live on Facebook. Yes. All right. And I am going to mute myself and turn off my camera. And it's all yours.
Bye. I am taking over. Hello, everyone. My name is Marjorie Sturgeon, and thank you, those of you joining us in Zoom and those of you following along on the Facebooks. I'm so happy that you're here. I hope you have enjoyed Start Omaha Week with DoSpace. It holds a special place in my heart because I went a few years ago in person, when we did those things. And it was just eye-opening as I was beginning my journey as a operator of an LLC and starting my podcast studio. So I love it, and I'm so thankful to get to be a part of this and share with you some resources. So this is Intro to Podcasting on today, Friday. Happy Friday. Let's get going. Feel like I'm going to be talking a lot and very quickly. And one of the things I'm going to share in the chat is a link to this presentation because I've built in a lot of resources and links. So I want you to be able to access those easily. So I'm going to share that in the chat real quick before I forget. To panelists and attendees, paste, and then back to present. Okay. So a little bit about me. My name is Marjorie Sturgeon. I'm a former journalist. I worked at a few local stations and I worked a little bit in Orlando. I've now turned digital marketing pro. So I do social media management, email marketing, website management, all the things. And then I have some side projects, some passion projects. So I've shot a little bit about for an independent film documentary. And then my husband is working on an independent documentary, so we're slowly working away on those. It's very intimidating, so it's a sore subject. And then I'm also a small business owner. I do operate a podcast studio here in Omaha in the Mastercraft building. But the biggest thing I want you to know about me is I'm not a guru. I like to just share information. I love when people have access to tips and tricks and things like that. So that's my goal here, and this is what I hope you take away. So enough about me. A brief overview of what we're going to talk about. I'm going to kind of do a brief history of podcasting and a little bit of look into the future, which, there's some big stuff going on like just the past 2 days. Developing your idea. We're going to talk a lot about that. A little bit about recording and editing, and then a little bit about the technical behind the scenes of what hosting is, what RSS is, and how that equals a podcast. And then finally, a little bit, all little bits of measuring your success. And there's the other reminder for myself to share this presentation so you can access it. So the first thing I like to do is ask you what you're listening to. This is my favorite part. When we were doing this class in person at Deuce Base, I just would have you shout them out. So if you want to type them in the chat, we'll kind of read them off later at the end of the presentation. And but the biggest thing I like when people share what they're currently listening to or what got them into listening to podcasts is it just really shows the variety of content that is out there. And there's always more. And you'll see all the different types. And really the biggest thing I want you to know is like, don't be intimidated by stuff that's already out there or the big names that announce they're starting a podcast, because there's room for you as the independent creator. So put yourself out there. Here's a look at the top podcasts, and we're going to talk a little bit more about the types of podcast in a few slides down. But the top podcasts are the Joe Rogan Experience, The Daily, so that's news types, Crime Junkie, true crime is a genre, This American Life, My Favorite Murder, Stuff You Should Know. So kind of informative, some entertainment. There's all kinds of varieties. I've linked to this chart here at the bottom, so you can go check it out or look for updated reports. Now, a brief history of podcasting. So basically, podcasting came about with the invention of the iPod. So that's early 2000s. And since then, it's grown. But basically, the iPod is so important because that allowed us to carry hundreds of files of data in our pockets, instead of like the giant CD books that we would flip through, us older millennials. And since then, though, another key development was in 2005 when iTunes built in native support for podcasts. That's basically the creation of the podcast directory, which is a huge part of discovery for podcasts. Now, and then jump to 2009, there's a survey by a research group called Edison, and they measure a lot of things about podcasting. But one of my favorite questions that they ask is, have you even heard the term podcasting? And in 2009, respondents said 43% of Americans said, yeah, I know the term. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean they know what it means, but they've heard the term. And then my favorite thing is when you jump to it, 2018, it jumps to 64%. And then I just watched, when was that? A month ago? Their update presentation, which is so entertaining, so nerdy. But I think it was 73% of Americans had heard of podcasting. So like, that's really exciting. The majority of respondents have said, hey, I know what that word is. That's huge. That's a start. That's the start of educating the folks. Okay. So in between those years though, 2013 was a milestone moment when Apple announced there were 1 billion podcast subscribers out there. And then 2014, I like to note because that's the year Serial came out, and that set download records. And that's really when podcasting became part of the pop culture like lexicon. So that was a huge moment. And really, you'll see headlines here recently saying podcasting is having a moment, podcasting is growing, podcasting is the thing, right? But it's been the thing and been growing and been having moments throughout all these years. So if you feel like you're late to the party's still going. So welcome. The link to this timeline is from International Podcast Day, which, if you want to mark that in your calendar, is September 30th. Okay, so the next slide I like to call it podcasting with purpose. And this is where I want you to just really think about, like, what are your goals for your podcast? Why do you want to start a podcast? Obviously, you want to talk, you have things to say, but there's a purpose that you can add to that. So the first one here is corporate communications. Maybe you're here because you are on a marketing team at your work. So one of the strategies you can do is basically corporate communications. And I heard from a very smart person who does PR at Nebraska Medicine once that all internal communications should be considered external communications. So as you're thinking about how you're talking to your employees, you can also think about how you're talking to your clients or customers or patients. So all that is useful. Number two, kind of along the same lines, business or personal branding. So really what I mean, why I set this apart is because it's more like thought leadership. Rather than the marketing side of things, it's thought leadership, opportunities to highlight your leaders in your organization or yourself and what you're doing to be a leader in your industry. So a little bit of that branding and letting people get to know you. The example I provided for you is how Netflix is using podcasting to highlight their producers, their writers, the people behind the scenes. And it's really cool to peek behind that curtain. Number three, amplifying marginalized voices and experiences. The link I've provided here is for Spotify's Sound Up program for women of color. And that has been going on for 2 years. And last summer, they opened up applications. So I really keep my eye on this for when they're reopening applications for the next round. But basically, it's kind of like a startup program for women of color to start a podcast. So keep your eye on that. And then the fourth thing is digital marketing. And this really ties it all together because as a digital marketer myself, I'm always looking for ways to integrate different strategies from the website to my Google ads to Facebook to social media, email, all those things. And podcasting is a way to bring it all together as well. So you're creating content that you can distribute on all these different platforms. That's why I have every marketer's favorite phrase is content is king. And the second half of that is distribution is queen. So if you're an admin on your Facebook page and you're seeing like your reach isn't getting what you want because you're sharing photos, maybe sharing a teaser video that you've made from your podcast will get more engagement. Just ways to strategize and multi-purpose content that you're creating. And then this one, the fifth one I just added this morning, actually monetizing because of some news that really just came out like yesterday and the day before. Apple has updated their system so that podcast creators can offer a subscription. And I need to do a deep dive into kind of what this means for like regular podcasters like you and I. But what I've linked to here is the Apple Podcast for Creators page. And so it's supposed to be a resource for best practices and things like that. And then I also linked to an article about how Spotify has plans to kind of do the same thing, of course. And they're also talking about like a la carte. So almost like I feel like it's like a Patreon sort of copy, but I definitely need to look more into that. But monetizing is almost always a motivation for folks and it's difficult, but it can be done. So I finally added that fifth one. And then this has come about since the last year, of course, COVID news. And really the main news out of that, though, was how to podcast remotely. And so what I've provided here are links to the ways different people are doing it. And It can be anything from as simple as what we're doing. We're watching Zoom and you could record it, to more complicated using a Premiere software service that will capture locally the audio on each person's computer and then upload it to the cloud. And then you download like the high res type file and edit it yourself. So there's really all kinds of ways to podcast. You just have to, the biggest thing you'll learn from this is try and adjust. So remember to be flexible. And if you're working with someone or bringing someone in for like an interview, just, as you're prepping them, give them kind of a guide, and I'll show you what I send people who I make arrangements for, but just prep them for maybe, there might be a technical issue or two that we may need to handle right off the bat. So bear with us. Technology, it's great when it works. So these are some great resources. I like the NPR one, because those are the professionals, right? And seeing what they're doing and how you can copy that it really speaks to what I love about podcasting is the barrier to entry is so low. And it's really a medium that speaks to me because everyone has a voice, everyone has a story. Anywho, next slide. So here's where we get a little bit into that. Everyone has a voice and story. And we're going to basically, when it comes to developing your idea, you're going to be asking yourself a lot of questions, and you need to answer those questions and work it out. I suggest getting a notepad and just brainstorming and then fine tuning. Okay. So the very first question you're going to ask yourself is, what's the mission of your show? And that's basically what I want you to do is write a mission statement, like 2 to 3 sentences. Okay. Because if you've ever been part of an organization, a corporate business or a nonprofit, or even volunteered for anything, they always have a mission statement. And that's the driving kind of idea that's going to keep you on target as you're going about deciding your content, deciding who's going to be on your show or what you're going to talk about on your show. So what's the mission of your show? That's the core. That's the foundation. Okay. And as you're thinking about that, also, it's great to have the idea, but you also need a plan. So that's why I like to link to this podcast interview from transom.org. They are a storytelling, radio storytelling sort of organization, and they have tons of tips and tricks, best practices for storytelling with audio. In this particular interview, they're talking to a gal named Arwen Nix, and she's a podcast producer, and she won a pitch contest actually for one of her ideas. And the idea was finding kind of the overlooked newsworthy stories on big iconic news days. So her first episode was about 9/11, and the podcast episode was featuring marine biologists who on the day of 9/11 took advantage of the ocean being so quiet. Air traffic stopped, shipping stopped, traffic in general just stopped. So it was an opportunity to explore like how human-made sound impacts marine life. And that was her first episode. Then episode 2 was about the day of Columbine, and then the parallel of a woman's story who was fighting for custody of her child. It goes a little bit deeper in that, but the lesson she wanted to iterate was plan, plan, plan. And this quote from her, I think, really says that. So she goes, I think that if you're going to give yourself a really narrow focus, which she did, for your project, you need to have the whole thing mapped out before you go forward, or at least the first half, because it's Murphy's Law. And no matter how good your idea is, doesn't mean it's going to be easy to get it to exist in the world. And that means basically, as she got past those first 2-3 episodes that were part of her pitch, it became really, really hard to actually find the story for the remaining episodes. So it's definitely a lesson that you can take away as you're planning your podcast. Next, you're going to ask yourself, what kind of show are you going to do? Are you going to do a scripted? So it's basically like a radio drama. The link example I provided to you is Homecoming, which has actually gone on to become a show on Amazon Prime. The next type of podcast is a narrative. And so that's kind of the news style storytelling. You have objective copy and subjective sound. So you go out, you gather your interviews, you get the emotion out of folks, and then you bring it back and you tell the story. And you have someone narrating in between. The third type is kind of a magazine style, and that's the interview style. The example I've provided for you is Mark Maron's WTF podcast. He has been known for getting like really deep interviews from celebrities, comedians, and all those different entertainment celebrities, right? And then the fourth style is Q&A or panel, and that's basically when you have more than one guest, and then or you're like running a conference and you record one of the panels as part of it. So I've kind of the link I provided to you is the community reunion panel. So hopefully you can enjoy that. Okay, so the next question. So we've covered what's the mission of your show, what type of show you want to do, and set yourself up with a plan. The next question is, do you have an episode or do you have a show? Okay, you may have a great idea that is kind of a one-off. That's perfectly fine. Now, but that's a good start. Develop that into how can you recreate that into multiple episodes? Okay, so ask yourself, do you have an episode or do you have a show? More questions. Here we go. Frequency. Now that means how often do you want to release your show? Weekly, bi-weekly, monthly? A lot of the podcasters I work with start monthly actually. And then like one example of someone I worked with is they actually wanted to start monthly, because that's all they could afford. But then they got a sponsor and now they're weekly. So whatever factors play a role in this decision making, though, like that, you have to plan for that. The next one is span. So there's a new word out there and it's pod fatigue. And this is kind of the warning I'll give you is pod fatigue is a real thing. You're excited to start your podcast. You're coming every week or however you planned, right? But then things get a little difficult, or maybe you're bummed out by not getting like the amazing numbers of listens that you wanted. So you kind of take a break. So what I suggest is working in a schedule of breaks. So especially around holidays or your family vacation and things like that, those will all come up and those will be factors in when you record or when you can edit or when you can get your podcast uploaded, all those things. So work in those breaks and give yourself some leeway. The next one is length of how long you want your show to be. And that's a common question. How long should my show be? It really depends on the content. And that's why that next line answer should be content driven. Yes, it really depends on the content. So, but I really recommend like 30 minutes, an hour. If you want more, like longer podcasts do exist. But think about too, who your audience is going to be and when you think they'll be listening. So break it up for them, maybe. Some other keys to success: a compelling host or guide. Basically, the key here is to not sound like an advertisement and someone who can be vulnerable and someone who listens well. The next one, unique format to pull in a listener. That can be anything from the sound design that you use to the interview format that you use or the questions that you ask. So just really think on how can you make your show unique. Next, get specific. That could help you with that other question of uniqueness. I recommend don't plan just to get with a buddy and talk pop culture. Find a specific topic that you can get really deep into. And the example I like to provide is I know someone who does a He-Man only podcast. So you can get really deep into that topic and you'll find your niche audience. So, and that's really helpful for building your community. And finally, along that same line, good transition. I'm full of them today, I feel like. Regularity matters. So be reliable for your audience. And what that boils down to is you worked in breaks for your season, but let your audience know, right? So if you want to release an episode every Monday, be there every Monday, because the moment you're not is the moment the audience that you've built up will have to go find somewhere else. So like any relationship, you want to be reliable. Now, here's where I kind of take a little pause when it comes to some caution, where particularly copyright and fair use. Those are kind of the most common things. And copyright really boils down to music. So I personally am very risk averse. So I subscribe to a music library where I can get copyright free music to utilize. That's how I kind of resolve that and don't have to even think about it. Fair use is kind of a gray area. And so what I've linked to are some resources that you can kind of read a little deeper into. And then one of the other common questions I get is, should I have my guests sign a release form? Technically, yes. Cross those T's, dot those I's, get that release form. And two, that's a great way to just kind of open the conversation, especially if you're interviewing a friend or a colleague, because when you get behind the microphone, you might feel like you can open up a little more. You'll be nervous, or you might feel like you can open up a little more. And you spend the rest of the afternoon thinking about, oh God, I shouldn't have said that. So your guest might come back to you and say, can we just not run that episode? And if you've already had the conversation of like, well, we can edit, and whatever you're not comfortable with, we can take out. But I really love this episode, and I would like for it to, and you signed off on it. So I would like to, so you'll have that conversation and ahead of time, so you don't have to have weird moments in your relationship with your friend or work buddy. So keep that in mind. And then finally, when it comes to monetizing, transparency is pretty much key there. I've linked to the Federal Trade Commission's kind of guidelines on how to do endorsements and that sort of thing. So basically, like I just say, be transparent to your audience. Like Mark Maron does, I think got called out a while ago, like early on, about how he does reads for sponsors. Because it wasn't very clear that it was a sponsored read. It kind of just flowed into his little diatribes. So that you have to set it apart. So use some music or a bumper or stinger to be like, this is an ad, so that your audience knows that you've received money for, and so it's clear what the relationship is. So I suggest reading a lot more in there. Now, this I like, because when you start a podcast, it can be overwhelming. And that's one of the reasons I was inspired to even create this presentation. But there's a lot of roles that go into creating a podcast. And if you're a podcaster crew of one, this is you. You're wearing all these hats, and you really deserve a lot of credit for taking all that on. And so I would just like to applaud you right now if that's your plan. And basically to say, like, every podcast crew looks different. If it's you and a buddy, you're sharing these roles. This sort of outline can help you divide up tasks. So you have someone who's called a producer. That's someone who, when I say editing, they're kind of doing, that's more on the writing side. They're writing questions, they're writing background, they're researching, arranging guests, any of the pre-production prep is basically encompassed by the producer. Then there's the editor. That's kind of the boss person. They're the one that has the mission statement like on their wall, pinned up there. So they're the kind of the final decision maker. Then there's the sound designer. That's the individual who's doing the audio editing and mixing in the music tracks or bumpers and stingers and intros and outros, that sort of thing. And then finally, there's the host of the show. You could also call them the talent. And that's really all they are. Okay, so now we're going to talk a little bit about some of the technical aspects. Now, when it comes to recording and microphones, there's a lot you can dive into, like the different recording styles of microphones and that things. But the biggest differences that impact a podcaster is USB or XLR or a mobile recorder. Those are kind of the three main types. And knowing what kind of show you're planning to do will help you determine the best gear to get. And the biggest thing I want you to take away here is don't ever let anyone shame you for the tools that you use to get your passion project or your job done. Okay. If you need to start your podcast on your phone, do it. Okay. One of the biggest earliest lessons actually that I learned working in a newsroom came from a photographer who basically was like, if you're out on your day off and you see something that's breaking news, more than likely it's a car accident, but you see something that could be breaking news and you want to send that into the newsroom, how are you going to do it? Are you going to run into the newsroom, go grab your gear, camera gear, tripod, and go back out to the scene where it may not even be there by the time you get back? Or are you going to just use what you have available to you right then and there? And that's the camera, the video camera that's in your pocket. It's your phone. So, that's what I say about getting started. And as you grow, as you feel more comfortable, then, and maybe save for a budget, then absolutely upgrade. And your audience will notice and they'll appreciate it. They'll be like, way to go. So that's what I say there. And at the bare minimum, like what I've pictured here is a device you can just get off Amazon and attach to your phone and capture better audio quality. So it'll just enhance what your phone captures. Okay. So get started with that. And then as you feel more comfortable, you want to upgrade, then there's two types of microphones, USB or XLR. So USB is can plug directly into your computer. The caveat is most of the time using more than one USB mic will result in problems. Excuse me. So that's when you need kind of a more equipment, right? So then you might want to try the XLR, which is actually what I'm using. You can see there, it's basically the type of cord that plugs into the back of the microphone is an XLR cord, and that plugs into a mixer, which then plugs into the computer. So it's a little bit more of an expensive setup. And then finally, there's the recorder. I like these because you can take them out to the scene. So if you're doing kind of maybe a mobile show where you're going out and interviewing restaurant chefs, you can go out to their kitchen and capture that environment and all those magical noises that happen in the kitchen, plus your interview with your chef, and boom, you have like a really engaging audio show that I want to listen to, man. So keep that in mind as you're thinking about which microphones you want to invest in. As for getting the best sound, I have a few tips. Number one, I don't have a lot of rules. I have tips and guidelines and like best practices, but like rules are also meant to be broken. But the one rule that I say, please don't break this, is wear headphones. Okay. A lot of these recording devices, the mobile ones, or when you set up your USB microphone, you'll see levels as you're recording. And that's just measuring the audio that you're getting, loudness. Levels are great to help you understand, like, yes, you're getting a signal. However, if you're not wearing headphones, you may not hear that there is a buzz coming from a low battery in your mobile recorder, but you're seeing levels, but there's still like a buzz in the background, and that is darn near impossible to fix in post. So wear those headphones, monitor what you're getting so you know that you haven't ruined a whole entire interview. How terrible would that be? Excuse me, I'm getting thirsty. Next, look for locations that will help keep the sound from bouncing around you. Things like curtains, carpeted floors, living rooms, couches, that sort of thing. Anything that will help absorb the sound. So you reduce the echoey sort of sound that can come from a big open room. Next is microphone placement. So if you Google microphone etiquette, you'll find some additional resources about talking into a microphone, but like keep it a fist length away. Don't let your interview guest hold it, because they may fidget, and then you'll end up with weird sounds like this in the background. So because people being interviewed, can get nervous and they'll fidget. So that can impact that. And then again, monitor the levels, make sure they're not peaking, especially if like someone starts yelling. Hopefully that doesn't happen. And then I like to start asking an easy question first. The easiest question is say and spell your name. And that's when you can set those audio levels too. You can ask them, how's the weather, that sort of thing. So you can just make sure you're capturing the best audio quality. And then 2, you have their name on record so that when you go to write up a story or a post about them, you spell their name right. And then 3 is you go to create your show and say you have to do an introduction, you have the pronunciation as well. And then finally, this is a guideline that I break all the time, is getting what's called a room tone. And that's just where you record 20, 30 seconds of just the quiet room that you're in. The room tone helps you in the editing process because when you put your show together and you have the transition parts, if you don't have music in there, room tone will help the listener feel less jarred by the pure silence between transitions, because pure silence is very jarring. Like that. Your listener might be like, oh no, what happened? Is my buffering? So if you add room tone in there, that'll help smooth that transition. And then finally, if you're recording at home, build a blanket fort or a pillow fort. Basically, like I said, location matters. And the more you do to keep sound from bouncing around you, the better audio quality you'll capture. Now, remote interviews are so handy today that, and really the last year has pushed a lot of these services to really enhance their ease of use, number one, and number two, the quality of audio that you can capture. So like you can start with Zoom, which I don't have listed on here, but I've listed basically a lot of resources that I see in the podcast groups that I'm in that people are using to do remote interviews. I just started using a service called Riverside.fm, which we are really excited about because they just launched a mobile app too for iOS. So a lot of the remote interviews that I've helped arrange, it's with people who are joining on their phone, and that has been so difficult as far as audio quality. So now that Riverside has the app, it's very exciting. But there's all kinds of resources, and basically you have to practice is what I recommend. So, and a lot of them have free trials. So you'll figure out what works for you. I met someone at a con convention who was using Squadcast who was podcasting with someone here in Omaha and someone in St. Louis. They're using Squadcast and they really loved it. So it boils down to like what you're both comfortable using and how successful you are with how you try it. So that's what I recommend. Now, tips for your remote interview. This slide is basically a copy of what I send to the guests that I arrange for folks doing their remote interviews. And I put in big red bold too, like, please read these tips so we capture the best audio session. Because I can't tell you how many times people, show up on the screen and they're not wearing headphones. And that is my biggest pet peeve. Please wear headphones if you're doing a remote interview or a Zoom or anything. The audio quality will be 100 times better. And that's like just the bare minimum of how you can get better audio quality. Wear those headphones with a microphone. The next thing is to locate a quiet place for your recording session, or have your guest locate a quiet place in their house. Ideally a small bedroom or office, basically not the kitchen where their teenage son will come in and make a snack while they're being interviewed. That may have happened for real. Or someone else who made a drink with a blender. Like, why? Why did you do that? Anyway, don't get me started. The next thing, put a sign on the door so that someone won't come in and interrupt you. And also activate do not disturb on the computer or your phone so that you won't get texts and phone calls. Next, keep a drink handy, but try to avoid drinking mid-sentence because you will get thirsty talking so much. And then finally, avoid moving around too much. If you're using your phone, set it down so you can be comfortable. If you're using a computer, and doing video conference, like I love to talk with my hands, and you see me doing it because I have fast internet, and so I know I won't buffer. But the why I say don't move around too much is because when you move around, you're generating pixels, which generates data, which takes up more bandwidth, which leads to buffering, basically. So that's how you can kind of avoid that, or even just turn video off. But the point of video conferencing is so you can see each other. So that makes it difficult. So you just have to play around and make whatever happens work. So that's why I always include that. Bear with us with the technical difficulties that we may encounter. Now, when it comes to editing, I'm really just going to touch on a couple of tips because learning how to edit is a lifelong process, really. But what I recommend is if you have an Omaha Public Library card, going to their online resources section and logging in for free to lynda.com. And then you just search audio editing and you'll see all the resources there that will teach you the basics and advanced parts of audio editing. But here are my number 2 tips for editing. Number 1, name your files. So I like to use a naming convention that uses the date, the interviewee name, and a description. So it'd be like today's date, Margie Sturgeon, and do space. So I can do my show on do space, right? So because I organize files by, project, but sometimes I need to search for that project. So it'd be do space. So that'll just help you find your files basically in the long run. And the more organized you are up front, the easier it'll be to get your project done. Or so I've discovered with independent filmmaking. And then finally, MP3 is used for what's to generate your RSS feed. And we'll talk a little bit more about that here in a few slides. Then when it comes to editing, there's so many different ways to do this as well. But it boils down to kind of like, again, what budget you have as far as software, which is actually called a DAW by the podcast industry, which stands for Digital Audio Workspace. And Audacity is free. Adobe Audition is another popular one, and Adobe has, the various subscription levels. And then I see people editing on GarageBand. I've seen people editing using Anchor is a hosting service. They have a built-in editor. So, and then there's all kinds of new editing apps in the app stores. So just play around with what works and what you have the budget for. But Audacity and Adobe are kind of the most popular ones that I see among other podcasters. Now, here's where we get into the technical back end of things. And basically, a podcast is a sound file, right? So you've done your interviews, you've edited your show, and now you have your MP3 sound file. Basically, you have to give that sound file a place to live on the internet, and that's what's called a hosting site. And there are numerous hosting service providers, and I'll kind of give an overview of some of those. But once you choose one, then you get what's called an RSS link, and it literally is a link, and it's like a feed that you submit to the different ways people listen. So Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Pandora, Stitcher, iHeartRadio, Google Play, Google Podcasts. I don't know. There's new names for it. And there's so many more, and I'll touch on that in another slide. So that's how it goes. You have a home for your podcast, then you get the link, and the link is what sends it to those directories. So that's how you don't have to upload it to Apple. You don't take your file and upload it to Apple. You don't take your file and upload it to Spotify. All you do is put it in your one little house, and the house sends it everywhere else. And so there are options when it comes to a hosting service. And in this slide, I've built in links to each one of these. And this is one of the hardest decisions, I think, when it comes to starting a podcast, is deciding which service to go with. And there are some paid options and there are some free options, and they all have caveats. So Anchor is a free option, and they have a lot of services that they also provide, and even some monetizing options. So a lot of people start there, but then I see as they've grown, they switch to another one, a paid one. So there's some limitations that they don't like there that they can eliminate by going to a paid service. Red Circle is a new one I'm hearing about, and I'm kind of interested in it, just looking at it, at their pricing. They have a free option, and then like if you get a sponsor, they'll just take a percentage of that. So that's, if that fits your boat, that's a good option. And then SoundCloud is kind of one of the ones that I went with early on, based on advice from another podcast studio runner. So SoundCloud has a free option, but it's like limited to 3 hours. And then they have a paid option. It's $144 a year. And it's pretty simple and straightforward. And then there's these other services like Libsyn's been around kind of the longest. Blueberry and Podbean are some other popular ones. And basically, when it comes down to deciding, it's what fits your budget, how much storage room do you get, and then some of these have like extras like a website or other analytics. And analytics too is something to keep in mind, especially if you're going to seek sponsorships. Some of these are what's called IAB certified, and that's the It's either Internet or Interactive Advertising Bureau. There it is, Interactive Advertising Bureau. And that's basically advertising on the internet. That's why I always think it's internet. I'm sorry. And so some of these are IAB certified, and big sponsors want that data rather than just the data. Like SoundCloud is not IAB certified. But if you get like a local sponsor and you can show that you're getting engagement through listens or even through your social media, that's usually enough to satisfy someone to give you money. Now, so we've talked about the hosting side, and then where do people listen? So these are what are called podcatchers, and that would be Apple Podcasts, that would be Stitcher, iHeartRadio, Spotify, Pandora, Pocket Casts, all the different ones. And it seems like there's new ones all the time. And what's funny is once you submit your podcast mainly to the big main directories like Apple, it will show up in other platforms that you probably didn't even know about. So, and that's the other thing is these hosting services, some of them automate that startup, distribution to, the listening platforms. But most of the time when I set someone up, I just manually go do it. And, there's these basically submission tools for Apple and the ones you want to be on. And you just kind of submit your RSS link, hit the prompts, and sometimes it's right away. You'll be listed in the directory. Other times it can take, I would say, plan for 72 hours. There was one a couple of summers ago over the 4th of July where there was some kind of back-end technical issue with Spotify, and I had to open a support ticket, and then they did something and it finally showed up. So as you set your launch date, keep that back date from there at least 72 hours so you can plan for any technical issues. And then finally, what's the measure of your success? Are you looking at just the numbers, the download numbers, and what you're getting from your hosting service? Are you reaching a new audience? So say you build a website and you build social media, then that's part of what you should look at, as well as your web traffic and your social media engagement. And then that kind of correlates into is one of your goals of measuring success, building brand awareness, because looking at all those things then will tell you if you're building brand awareness. So those are kind of the different ways to measure success by the numbers. But I like to consider success like you had a project inside you and it's now out in the world. That's success to me. So I would say keep that in mind as you look at those numbers, and maybe they're not like the thousands that you want at first. You have to be patient is basically what I would recommend. And then a few more slides here. This one is for extra resources. I mentioned the transom.org, so that's a link to theirs. The NPR Guide for Students has a really great glossary, so you can learn some of those weird terms like podcatcher and things. A video about different ways to monetize, and that is changing now that Apple's got a new feature. So I'll probably have to update that for next month. Google Podcast Creators, Podcasting 101. Google has a series of videos about it. I think it takes about an hour to watch all of them, and it will pretty much reinforce what you saw here. So I really recommend going to watch those. And I link to the libraries section where you can access lynda.com. And then this is one of my favorite Facebook groups. So I recommend going and joining a few Facebook groups around podcasting, because people like to share like their own best practices, and you can ask questions and support each other. So Podcast Movement is actually a group that correlates with a annual event. And I think the next one is in August, like in Nashville or something. But it's an opportunity to also find more resources. And this is a slide that if you want to screenshot it, do it, but it'll also be here in the link of the Google Doc. But basically print this off and it's your podcast checklist. So to launch a name for your show, your mission statement, all those questions that I asked you that you need to ask yourself, defining roles for you and the friend that you've asked to come along on this journey, a launch date, and then kind of back date from there, your recording and post-production, artwork for your show. I use Canva a lot to make graphic design. It's awesome. And you can use that too to make your artwork, or you can commission someone to do it. music. Do you want intro music, outro, bumps, stingers for transitioning different segments? And then each episode that you upload will need a title and a description. And then if you want to get more technical, you can go learn about metadata. And then the big decision of a hosting service. Should I try another one? Okay, maybe I will. And then finally, are you going to have a website? Are you going to do social media? How are you going to build that audience? So that's your podcast checklist in a super fast recap. And some more podcast tools. SpeakPipe is kind of a voicemail sort of service, so you can incorporate some community engagement with your podcast if you want. Headliner is a great tool for making little teaser videos that you can share on social media. Descript is a great transcription service and also an editor as you get more advanced with it. Otter.ai is also a transcription service. Canva, great graphic design service. And then the last one is like a vocal warm-ups kind of resource, because your voice is very important too, obviously, in podcasting. So keep that in mind as well. And then I like to kind of highlight some Omaha made podcasts. And if you want to go over this list on your own, I will let you. I do like to add to it. So if you do have one, please put it in the chat. And that's it. And so I saw some questions come in the Q&A. So if you have questions, I'd love to answer them. I'm going to stop share so I can see the chat. Q&A. Someone said webinar. Yes. This isn't. I'm just going to say yes. Send. Are you going to send this PowerPoint out separately? I will paste it here as well in this question so you can get it. Also, another question about the PowerPoint. There you go. And we got some submissions for what people are listening to. That's always good. Any true crime podcasts, my worst date, anything NPR, stuff you missed in history. Someone likes to learn. Another person said Dave Ramsey, also very popular. Yes, good one. Someone else loves true crime. They love My Favorite Murder and TED Radio Hour. Ooh, yeah, that's a good one. Someone else, articles of interest, come to where I'm from. That sounds interesting. Oh. And then someone else said, the best camera is the one you have with you. Yes, absolutely. So if there's any other questions, I know I covered a lot and I feel like I talked really fast. Someone said thanks. You're welcome. It's my pleasure. I hope you enjoyed it, and I hope you learned something. And I hope also, if you do start a podcast, so that I'd love to hear about it. So please look me up and let me know how it's going. I like to keep in touch with someone who actually took this course. Gosh, I guess a year and a half ago. It'll probably be 2 years this summer. She has a podcast called Ask a Scientist and is rocking it. And she took this course at Do Space that long ago. So it's very exciting. And I enjoy so much seeing her grow and the guests that she gets. It's so cool. And so important because she's participating in science communication, and that's really cool. So yes, thank you all for joining in. I hope you enjoyed it.
Hey, thank you, Marjorie. That was great.
Good. Thank you.
Okay, I am ending.